Okay, so I'm just going to touch on two things. I have about 20 plus slides. I do want to go over sort of what's going on in the US and regional venture landscape, particularly because of the COVID situation. And then I'll also talk about what's going on with us. So as Laurie said, we've been investing in life sciences since 2002, and we're still going strong today. Okay, so why do we even care about venture capital? And I guess you have to go back in your way back machine, and sort of this is how the world looked up until maybe 2007 and the Great Recession. And basically, venture capital is the primary way that innovation comes from the labs and gets to the market, or it gets to the patients. So it's an incredibly, historically incredible driver of innovation. And so where does it come from and what is it? It's basically private money that takes a greater risk, and in return, it gets a greater reward. And what may surprise you is that it actually comes from very conservative sources like pension funds, endowments, and wealthy individuals. And their goal is to beat the returns that you can get in the public markets. Now that's hard, it's increasingly hard to do because our public markets have been like gangbusters, but that's the goal, is that they don't want to just get an 8% on average return from the public markets. So it's organized into venture funds, and those venture funds are managed by investment professionals that we call VCs, venture capitalists. And it's important to remember that venture capitalists are investing other people's money. So they really have sort of a fiduciary duty to get the money out and to make money. And that drives a lot of what they do and think and believe. So the business model is they collect money into a fund, and then they invest that over 2 or 3 years. They try and find investments that can make a return in 5 to 7 years from the investment. And then every couple of years, they have to go out and raise a new fund. So it's a huge burden. VCs spend a ton of time helping, keeping in touch with their current investors, and also thinking about raising a new fund. And they're constantly having to show what they've accomplished. So it's like not fun. And fortunately, BioAdvance is a different business model, which I'm always grateful for. And I'll talk about that shortly. So let's talk about what happened with COVID. So it was, personally disruptive to all of us. And professionally, all investors just ground to a halt in March. The world was turned upside down. Sort of our digital health companies who were selling into healthcare systems all of a sudden were slammed shut. Everybody who was out raising money couldn't get any reaction or get any traction with investors. So, and most of the concern was about, well, what's happening with your current portfolio? We're not going to even look at new investments. So it was really a pretty significant pause for about 3 months. And then partly because the public markets rallied after they dropped in March, but then they rallied. And that gave healthcare investors confidence, partly because the world now realizes, because of COVID, that healthcare companies are the ones who are going to solve COVID, and they're also the ones that are going to solve a lot of other important diseases. So there was a lot more attention, I think, paid. And venture capitalists, partly because they were comfortable that the public markets had recovered, which always sort of dribbles down into earlier stage investing. And partly because they committed to invest money from other people, so they've got to put the money to work. So by May, things started, the pipeline started to open up and come back. And the good news is we all thought in March that valuations were going to take a huge dive. They really didn't, because once again, the public markets didn't get cut back. So all was really, it's pretty healthy. And I would say the healthcare sector really has performed better than the tech sector. The tech sector has had huge disruptions because they have the Ubers of the world and retail and food and restaurants and things like that. So there's been tremendous dislocation in the tech sector, and healthcare has been pretty resilient. I think the trends that I'm seeing, and I'll show one slide, but that concern me a little bit, so I don't know if this robust pace is going to continue, but first-time financings are down. That's what we call Series A financings. We always look at how that's doing because that really affects the pipeline from the beginning. So Most of the money is going into later stage companies. Seed and angel investing has decreased, and they're kind of an important source of capital for startup companies. And angels, I think, just because of the shock when the market collapsed in March, I think they're still hesitant. So they're just not fully comfortable putting their money to work, because it's their own money. Unlike venture funds, angels are investing their own money. And then I think there have been a lot of funds have been raising their 5th, 6th, 7th fund, but you haven't seen a lot of new funds getting started. So that means that the market is softening a little bit as well. So trends to watch. So this is what I meant about how the healthcare sector has really soared back from the pandemic, because that bar on the right is only a half a year worth of data. So you can tell if the momentum continues, we're going to blow through this graph and be way high, both in terms of number of deals and in terms of dollar amounts invested. So it's sort of an amazing chart to look at. Now, healthcare, as defined here, is everything. It's biopharm, it's digital health, it's healthcare services. It's a very broad category. And if you drill down, there are different trends within the subsectors, but yeah, on balance, U.S. healthcare is doing gangbusters. I don't know if it's going to continue. I think that's really the open question. Okay. So this is the bad news, and it's actually not even news, because it's every year. It's the same story, but most of the capital continues to go to Massachusetts, California, and New York. This is healthcare capital. New York has really come on strong lately, and that trend has continued in 2020. And as I said before, the capital is being concentrated in fewer companies, especially in the biopharm space. So, and larger rounds are accounting for most of the capital invested. But the one change that I noticed in 2020, last year, I think mega rounds were most of the capital, like 80% of the capital. I've seen a decline in the $100 million financings, but there's still large rounds are still the norm. And then, as I said, unfortunately, capital is going to later stage companies and later stage investment rounds, because everybody's looking at the market, and biotech companies are going public at a pretty fast clip. So investors like the idea of putting in late stage financing and then being able to go public while the window is still open in the next 12 months. So that is the bad news, but as I say, it's not that different, other than this trend towards later stage rounds, I would say. But the really good news, and this is, again, it's been happening since the recession in 2007, but it's really just taking a lot of, it's heading, there's a big head of steam, I think, on a lot. There are large mega funds, and those are, you know, kind of an amazing, like the Blackstones of the world and OrbiMeds and NEAs and things like that. Enormous amounts of money. That means they can't sprinkle small amounts over large numbers of companies. They really have to focus and put a lot of money into a few companies. So that's what's kind of driving some of these trends I've been talking about. The number of venture funds, I think that's plateauing. This was actually, well, except for the corporate venture funds are increasing. So almost every large company now has a venture fund. And I think that's where the growth in the number of venture funds is coming from. And those play an incredibly important role. Corporate funds, you know, sort of stick with early stage no matter what, and they're a little bit more resilient than a traditional fund might be. And then there's this whole list of new kinds of investors, and I'll show you what the picture looks like. It's almost easier. I didn't even put all of them. So today's landscape looks a lot different than the olden days. So now you have a whole group of what I call non-traditional investors. So it's disease foundations and family offices. Family offices are basically wealthy families who might have put money into a venture fund, but now they're just doing direct investments themselves. They're hiring investment professionals. So they're a whole new source of money. Economic development has sprouted up all over, especially in New York and to a lesser extent in New Jersey around here. Angel funds have been a very important part of our regional landscape. Accelerators and incubators, you know, Dream It, you might have heard of Dream It. That sort of, they don't put as much money to work, but the money they do invest is actually pretty important money. Health systems, I think one of the interesting things is health systems are now setting up venture arms, and they're investing in things that really will be meaningful to the health system itself. And that may be different than what other people are interested in. So I think it's a whole new angle on investing, and I really like that development. Then you have these tech disruptors. I mean, Google and Apple and everybody's playing in the healthcare space that they haven't been in before. So that's kind of fun to watch. And then the NIH particularly has stepped up, and they're just doing really interesting programs that support clinical trials and things that are not academic research. So this whole non-traditional investment space is, to me, the most important thing that's going on. You still have venture capital, and it's still really important. But if you're a startup, you really almost need to be looking, there are lots of different there's no single roadmap anymore. You may pick one or two of these blue boxes to go after before you even think about going to venture capital. So it gives a lot of flexibility, and I think it allows you to get to where you need to go and not necessarily rely on the traditional venture capital world, which has its own peculiarities. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the regional space. So unfortunately, in the greater Philadelphia area, we have very few active investors based here. Now, that's always been the case. I think it's a little worse now than it used to be, but it's sort of a fact of life. I mean, we've always had to attract capital from outside the region. But this shows, I think I've forgotten a few people. Now, Rittenhouse, I heard just yesterday, Rittenhouse, which is listed under venture, is not going to be making any more new investments, and I don't think they're raising money either. On the other hand, the New Jersey Tech Fund got started, so they're now active. So there's subtle changes, nothing dramatic and nothing major in the way of people sort of setting up shop here. Angel investing is actually one of our more robust features. We have very active angel investment funds. Keiretsu is a national angel fund that has a chapter here. So they can pull together $2 million around the country. So very interesting. So that's kind of the local picture. And then you have the economic development, Ben Franklin Science Center, the QED program, and Phase 1 Ventures. I haven't heard much on Phase 1 Ventures, and I'm on the advisory board, so I guess it'll probably get started again now that they have a new CEO. And most people have heard of Ben Franklin. So it's not, you know, I think my advice is don't rely on the local investor base. You know, touch base, but it's just not going to be the primary way you get your capital. So, and here's what the healthcare venture looks like. It's similar to the national picture. I think the decline is a little bit more significant. Well, this is only half a year. Again, the right bar is only half a year, but I don't think we're going to keep pace with the previous 2 years if we continue this. So I think we're going to end up a little bit light in Philadelphia. And then especially if you look at, this is where I get really worried because the Series A deals have dropped down to 7. We've only had 7 this year. So now, you know, some PitchBook data, and this is from PitchBook, which is a very good data source, but it does change constantly, and there are corrections and people forgot to file and report. So it could change, but right at the moment, it doesn't look great. Like if that's half a year, we're going to be pretty light again.
Barbara,
yeah.
Quick question. Is that because deals are not people aren't pitching, or investors can or won't invest?
Yeah, well, I think this does show the pandemic effect. So if you weren't in the process of raising a fund in January or February and met the investors, it is really hard. A lot of investors are not happy about doing virtual investing and not meeting the team. So I think there's a little bit of, now I will say, and this is actually an important point, so I'm glad you brought this up. this is not the full picture of what's going on in Philadelphia, because one of the phenomenons is we're having companies go public, and companies who go public don't show up in the venture capital databases, but it's an extremely healthy trend. So, and the Roche acquisition doesn't show up, the Roche acquisition of Spark doesn't show up in these numbers, and they're going strong and hiring people. So there are a lot of actual good things happening in our region that aren't represented by this kind of venture capital picture. So I don't mean to be gloomy, but there does seem to be a little bit of a pause in the Series A. Now we're closing a deal. Well, it might not be counted because the company has multiple locations, so I'm not even sure it'll show up in the Philadelphia deal. So I hope to see a little bit more activity for the second half. I do think we were hit hard because VCs kind of stayed in their corners, and their corners are not here. So I think it's just a function of the fact that we don't have a lot of capital locally. These are some of the recent Series A deals. I think a couple Penn deals in there. I forgot to put Trekit in because Trekit just closed. But that was an A, wasn't it? I think that was an A. I didn't put Trekit down. And so this is an example because I don't think it showed up in the pitch book yet. And I don't think there was another one Mobile Ion closed a Series A, and they're not in pitch book yet either. But so like I say, the picture could be a little bit better once all the data gets collected. But this is a very heavy these are primarily cell and gene therapy companies. So you can see that that's still the flavor of the month around here. And I expect that to continue. I don't see that changing much.
Great.
All right, so what does this mean for anybody who's thinking about raising money? Well, you've got to look outside the region. I say this every time I talk to anybody who's who's raising money. You cannot just sit, here. You've got to be looking elsewhere, and don't count on the local investors to solve the problem. I think it's important just to make sure you're raising the right amount of money because the amount of money you're raising actually drives what investors might be suitable for you. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So knowing how much money to raise to get to something that's a meaningful value creation point is really important to figure out that dollar amount. Because there's a big difference between raising 3 million to get somewhere and raising 20 million. So it's going to affect which investors you approach. And then this, I think you're crazy not to pursue non-traditional investors. I mean, they might have more patience, they might have longer timelines, some of them, they're not as concerned in some cases about returns. They're doing it for strategic reasons. So it's just a really important group. And to do that, you unfortunately have to spend some time. You have to network, you have to research. And it does take a little bit more work to understand who's out there that might be suitable, but PCI will help. I mean, it's really important to spend some time and be somewhat focused and start with 10 funds that look like a good fit, 10 organizations, I should say. So fitting your opportunity, and this is just to drill down on this a little bit. So there are different types of investors, and understanding how VCs think versus how a disease foundation might think, or how the government, I mean, the NIH doesn't care about any returns, so they're wonderful. So knowing knowing the types of investors out there is really important. And then if you're going to traditional investors or traditional funds, you really need to be looking at funds that have recently closed, because they can't start a new investment at the end of their 3 years of investing. They really want to start it in the first 12 to 18 months. So that's a sophisticated thing to think about, but it is really relevant, and it will narrow down. So you have to be tracking who's raising money. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So the investor has to have capacity. Usually if it's a new fund, that shouldn't be an issue. Your financing is the right size. It's by far the biggest filter you're going to find. If you're raising a $25 or $50 million round, then go to NEA. If you're raising a $10 million round, come to us. So it makes a big difference. And then the valuation has to be in the investor's comfort zone. And, we just turned down somebody last week, a digital health company that we really liked. We liked the team, we liked the problem they were solving, we liked what they were doing, we liked everything about it, except they wanted $35 million valuation, and we thought that was crazy. So that was the sole reason we had to say no. So it happens. I mean, it's just not in our comfort zone to go that high for a startup digital health company. And so people, and that's sort of the point, people will pass. They won't negotiate. They'll just say, yeah, never mind. We're not even going to bother trying to get you comfortable with the lower amount. And then you have to be at the right stage of development and sort of in a space that's in scope. And you get by looking at websites of investors. And most investors do try and have websites that talk about how much they invest per company, how much they invest in financing, what areas of interest maybe. And you can also just look at their portfolio and see, well, I don't see anybody in there that looks like a platform company, or I don't see anybody. So you can get a feel for what they like from the current portfolio. So it does take, unfortunately, some research time. Now, I think the good news is now it's so much easier. There's more competition because everybody's doing virtual conferences, but virtual conferences, I mean, they're like almost every day, it feels like. I do think investors are going to them more than they did in the past because it doesn't take as much time. You don't have to travel. So we're participating in conferences that we never would have spent time and money going to, but now we can take a look. So it also means that there's more competition because companies from all over the globe are able to present globally. But it's still, you really have got to get out there. And it's such a great time to do it because the prices are cheaper. You don't have to spend money on traveling. So it's really important. We like Resi. We continue to like Resi, although lately that has been super global. It used to have almost like a regional focus, and you'd go to the one in DC or Philadelphia and it would be local companies, and now it's companies from all over. Bio, I think is less, well, bio's okay. I don't think it's as good for startups. Life Sciences Summit, which usually is up in New York, that's going to be virtual. HIMSS in South by Southwest for digital health. I guess HIMSS, I don't even know what happened, Laurie. Did HIMSS, they just canceled, right? They didn't do HIMSS this year.
No, I think they did just cancel.
Yeah, I think they canceled. I don't know if they're going to do, I'm not sure if they're doing virtual coming up or not, but
yeah.
Biotech Showcase. I mean, so there are lots and lots of venues. It seems like Cleveland Clinic for MedTech. So you have to start paying attention to who's out there. Now, how do you do that? I think the best way to just get clued in is to read free newsletters. And there are a bunch of those too. I read too many of them and I start to find that they're very duplicative. But if I had to hit the most important, I would do the Fierce newsletters. I would do Big 4 Bio because it's all about what's going on in the region and it's important to know who's coming here to invest. Faster Cures is interesting and has slightly different angles. I'd say Biopharma Dive and Endpoints. So there are tons of newsletters. And actually, if you sign up for one, I think you end up getting approached by others. So Big 4 Bio, though, I highly recommend. We sponsor it. And I think it's been really helpful in aggregating what's going on in the region. So, and it'll tell you who's investing in what the new funds are raising money. You just have to, put aside some time every day to figure out, to keep up with what's the landscape, because there is a lot going on. So I did take a look at Series A healthcare deals this year just to see what the trends, if there were any trends to speak of. And as I said, there have been closings. I think some of the closes were started, before the pandemic, and then they closed during the pandemic. And then I've started to see people who are making new deals virtually, and they've bitten the bullet and they're putting money to work. And I think that's going to keep up because VCs have to put money to work. So what was really interesting, though, to look at the list of Series A's, immuno-oncology for the first time seemed to be down. I mean, last year, I swear 80% of the deals were immuno-oncology and just different flavors of oncology. Not necessarily immuno-oncology, but and/or oncology. And there were a lot of rare diseases. And I think both of those seem to be down a little bit. In fact, there seemed to be an overall desire to diversify away from oncology. So it was there, people were working on new companies in allergies or immunology or inflammation or pulmonary, cardiovascular, which I almost never see cardiovascular deals, but a couple cardiovascular deals closed. Microbiome. So very eclectic, very all over the place, and I think it's really healthy. So I thought that was a pleasant change to see, just not everybody focusing on oncology. Cell and gene therapies are about the same as before. I think they are a dominant sector, and I think that will continue. And as I said, particularly in our region. Platform companies way up. I think almost every company, every Series A I looked at, it was a platform company. So that's really popular these days. It's not always the case. We've always liked platform companies because it gives us multiple products and multiple shots on goals. But yeah, it's really in vogue now. On the digital health side, telehealth, remote patient monitoring, all the things that make medical, the delivery of medical care easier in a pandemic are back up. So I would say that's going to be a dominant trend in the digital health space. Now, interestingly, infectious disease, after everything that's going on, there was only one COVID Series A that I saw this year. Like most of the COVID activity, I think, is coming from existing companies who add programs. Certainly in our case, we have 3 portfolio companies that added a COVID program to what it's not their core or even main or primary concern, but they're working in it. And that seems to be the case. So most of the COVID activity is just being done by existing companies, certainly the big pharma space, we all hear about that. But there was really only one Series A that I saw around COVID per se, which was a little bit of a surprise. I think and sort of segueing to diagnostics, again, you don't see many COVID diagnostics companies getting funded. I think it's happening in the larger companies. So you still don't see the impact of COVID too much on in the investing space. Diagnostics in general continues to be a real slog if you're like a single biomarker trying to get approved or trying to go into clinical trials to show what you can do. I think there's a fair amount of money in the public companies like the Thrives and the Freenome and Grail, I think. So there's a lot of money going into the larger companies that have sort of broad platforms for their diagnostics. But I think the single biomarker company is just really tough to get funded. So what's my time? What am I doing? Okay. Couple slides on what BioAdvance is up to. So we are still around. We've been around since 2002. We started off with $20 million. We're an unusual business model. I alluded to it before because we recycle our returns. So we don't get money from other people. We did start with money from Pennsylvania, and there is actually an obligation to share returns once we get to a certain point. So they're primarily our partner, if you want to call it that. But for the most part, we just recycle. We keep our returns. We don't get a carrier. We don't share as a management team in what our returns are. So we've grown. We've actually grown from 20 million. We're now up to about 75 million. And we have a pretty healthy pot of money to invest. So we're very active. We do prefer the early stage seed Series A. We're lately getting a lot of companies that are at the Series B stage, and I'm just not comfortable, I think. Yeah, so we still prefer to be at a company when it gets started, then we grow with the company and we really know we can help. And so that's really, I think, where our best role is. But since we have grown as a fund, I think we can play a better role in Series A's, small Series A's in the region. So I think that's kind of a evolving story, and we'll have to see how that goes. Human health is our only focus, and we've made 98% of our money from therapeutics. So that's really where I think our strength is. That's partly because of our team, and I think they're pretty well known, but I can certainly talk about that if people have questions. We have invested in diagnostics. We have not made any money in diagnostics, so that's, a challenge. Devices, we've had mixed results with devices. Digital health, we made a little money in digital health, but I think we're also about to lose some money in digital health. So that, I think the jury is out on digital health as an investment sector. I think it's a very hard field compared to investing in therapeutics, but we're still looking. We invest about up to 1.5 million per financing. So we've grown. We used to do 500,000 per financing, and we've increased that. And we used to cap at $1.5 million per company, and now we're up to 5 million per company. We actually haven't hit the 5 million, but our board has authorized us to go up to 5. We do have this no planes, no hotels rule, which means that we really like the I-95 corridor, New York down to Washington is really a sweet spot for us. Ironically, we can't even really get to Pittsburgh without getting on a plane. So Pittsburgh is sort of out of scope, but New York is in scope. So it's unusual, but, and there is a lot going on in New York. So I think everybody has to be aware that that's where the investors are. People should be looking in New York for money. There are also some interesting companies coming out of the schools there. So they're doing a nice job getting a hotspot going up there. So we've invested, as of next week, it'll be 50 million. So we started with 20, we've invested 50. We still have like a lot of money to invest. So we've made all of that, 93 companies, and they've gone on and had products and services and raised money, and it's all good. So let me talk a little bit about sort of the key things. We actually just did an analysis of why do we turn people down. And so all the reasons we turn people down are on this slide, because you really have to say yes to all of these. Like any one thing will make us pass. So this is an important slide. The top 3 questions are questions that every investor cares about. Do you solve a problem that others don't? And that part is very important. You can't just solve a problem that everybody else is solving. It has to be in a better way than other people. Can you make a significant return on the investment in a reasonable time period? Now, there's a lot of leeway in there because our business model is not, we don't have to go out and raise funds all the time. We actually can afford to be more patient. We have companies who we've invested in 17 years ago that we still don't have a return. So, but it's okay. And we're happy that they're still alive and hiring people and doing good things. And so we can we're much more patient than a venture fund is, which is why we can go in earlier than venture funds and get things ready and get things going. So our thresholds are a little bit more generous than a venture fund would be. And then, does your team have the relevant skills? That's just really important. So, and we can, if we have a minute, I can talk a little bit about each of those. But there's some other things that I think are equally important that are maybe peculiar to BioAdvance. So the fit for our fund is what I was sort of talking about. Like if you're raising a $50 million round, we're probably not a great fit. I mean, we could get started, like if you did a seed round of 3 million before you get to your $50 million, we can participate in the $3 million round. It's really, it just almost isn't, for us to be in a $50 million round with only $1.5 million to invest, it doesn't, the economics don't work out very well. Other reasons that are not a fit, well, location is a constant problem. People are always getting things from North Carolina. Then we also have to worry about, because we can't carry a company with just our own resources. So one of the most important things we do is figure out whether you're going to be attractive to the next round of funding, whether that's from a disease foundation or whether it's from the NIH or whether it's from, a venture fund. We have to really make sure there is a financing path after we invest. And that causes more things to drop out than you might think. And then here's a practical issue, and it's probably true for most venture funds. You have to have an internal champion. I mean, you can have a great opportunity and it checks a lot of boxes, but if nobody at BioAdvance is excited about it and wants to do the extra work and go out and get the outside experts and do the due diligence, you know, it's not going to happen. So it is just a practical issue that it has to cause somebody to get excited enough to do the extra work. So solving a problem, this actually is probably the biggest reason we don't fund something. It's just because you can solve a problem, but it has to be differentiated. So like just last week, we were looking at a topical atopic dermatitis product, and they said, oh, we're the best thing, and what's on the market, and there's steroids, and there's this. And they completely ignored the fact that there were some major new mechanisms that are in phase 3 trials that are going to affect the landscape. And they hadn't tested their molecule to know against JAK inhibitor. It was a JAK inhibitor that it's, I think, in phase 3. So they had no data to show whether they're going to be better than the JAK inhibitors when they get to the market, and everybody expects them to get to the market. So not being able to show, you have to early on figure out how you're going to show that your product is going to be better or faster or cheaper if you're digital health. So it's shocking, but most people just are content. They don't have an active comparator in a preclinical model or something. They don't really think about how we're going to be better. We just say, well, we can do this, and isn't that great? It's like, no, you have to be better. So to me, there's a phrase that has come into being. I think that, some people used to look for proof of concept, but in a way, the most important thing is to show commercial relevance. And that is the phrase, like, how are you going to be relevant? And have you really sort of shown why you're going to be relevant? In the digital health space, this is a very difficult one for us. And I think digital health companies, there is no pitch book that brings together, well, there is, but it's very hard to know who's playing in the digital health space because there aren't patents and there aren't databases. It's just really confusing. So it's hard for us to know whether a digital health company is doing something different that somebody down the road might be doing as well. So to us, we really do want to see customers because that to us means that the customers have spent the most time looking at the landscape and looking at what's best. So it's a surrogate for us for finding out whether somebody actually thinks you are different or better or faster or cheaper. So investors have to be able to make money. As I said before, venture capitalists have a fiduciary obligation to make money, and it's very bad when they don't, and they don't sometimes. They won't be able to raise a new fund if they can't make money. And we just have to be able, so the time frames and the amount of money you can make, we're a little, again, we're more generous, I think, on these parameters than a venture fund would be. So we can survive because we have our survival. We have to be able to keep the lights on and make enough money so that we can reinvest and put more money on the street. So that takes, on average, like we're happy if we can get a 3x return. Our actual returns have been probably closer to 5x, but we can survive if we have like a 3x return on a number of companies. Venture capitalists want to see 10 times their money made. So somewhere in that range, and then the non-traditional investors have different preferences. So kind of knowing what the strategy of the organization is really important. And you have to be able to do it in a reasonable time frame. For us, we can afford not to have some companies exit and they can continue to be companies and survive and do well. But for venture capitalists, you have to either be able to go public or be sold, or those are really the two main exits in a reasonable period of time, 4 to 6 years from investment. And then the right team, again, this isn't the biggest issue we see because we don't expect to have the full complement of experience around the table. At the stage we invest, we're happy to find people or help you find people or recommend people to sort of fill in the blanks. But we do want to see that a person there has the relevant experience So we don't really love to see academics who are going to try and be CEOs. We don't think that's a great idea. Now, one of our companies, we have an oncology company where an academic did just that, and she's doing a fabulous job. So we're happy about that, but it's an exception. We really don't like seeing family members. That is just a red flag to all investors, because it usually means that you're hiring somebody for convenience, not because they're the best person. And we don't like to see solo entrepreneurs. Actually, it's really good to have a partner. So that's our advice, is not to try and do it alone. It's a tough slog, and there are lots of challenges, and you really want to have a partner. So with that, we're always happy to talk. We'll give you feedback. We think our role is really to give feedback and tell you what questions you need to answer if you're not quite ready, or what kind of investor might be appropriate. We'll help you find advisors. You know, we're just happy to help. So you don't have to solve everything yourself. We can give you some input. And to do that, I suggest Marnie McCoy is our key person, and many of you probably know her, or contact me, and we're both happy to get you going. So that's it for now. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, one question we got in the group chat was if you accept dilutions or co-invest.
Yes. We come in, we're happy to come in alone. We're happy to come in as part of a syndicate. We can even lead small rounds if they're, you know, under 10 million. But yes, we actually don't accept dilution. In an ideal world, we keep investing in the company every round. I mean, that's part of our plan, unless we don't like what's going on. But we understand that if we don't co-invest in a later round, we're going to be diluted, and that's fine, and that's our choice. So no problem.
And one question I always like to hear you talk about is, at what point should someone kind of initiate you know, relationship with you all? But, you know,
we like the sooner, I mean, we like to come in and have you talk to us really early, like before you even apply for a grant. So, because to me, the biggest disconnect is that people who want to be moving their innovation down the market are not using NIH money to answer some really key questions that could be answered with NIH money. And it's sort of around design of experiments and how do you think about it, and thinking about that commercial relevance. So the sooner you get that kind of input, the better. We like to see, sort of in the non-biopharm space, I think the I-Corps program does a fabulous job in getting people, regardless of what the product is that is being developed, you're getting the market feedback. What would you have to show? So we're happy to see you after you've gone through I-Corps, because I think I-Corps does a really nice job trying to position the technology.
Thank you for those who don't know, PCI runs the Penn I-Corps program, which is starting soon. So please
okay.
Reach
so
out
you're
to us
virtually. That's exciting.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so we really like to see you before you're ready, because, you know, the sooner it just helps you get steered in the right direction. So it's not ever too early. Now, you may not get money, but you will get feedback. So that's the goal.
Okay, we have another question from the chat. We heard that venture capital was moving out of New York City, Boston, and San Francisco and looking at Philadelphia. Has that slowed because of COVID or another reason, or was that always a wrong premise?
Well, we've always had to get money from San Francisco and Boston. Lately, there's been more money in New York, so I think it's easier to get money from New York than from all the other places. But thanks to the cell and gene therapy, I think there are a lot of people coming from the West Coast and from Boston who are investing in the cell therapy companies and gene therapy companies. So they're now used to coming here. I think they understand why the companies are here. So it's a very powerful story. Now, just, you know, there has been a slight downturn this year, but I think it's mostly pandemic related, and I think it'll readjust and get back again. But even in the 1990s, and Paul Blake is on the phone and knows this, I was with a company called Cephalon, and Cephalon, even in the 1990s, Cephalon and Centocor and all these big companies had to get money from Boston and San Francisco. And all of the investors at that time said, oh, you have to move out of Philadelphia, you have to move to Boston, you have to move to California. And they didn't. So it's just been a battle we fought for years, and it's too bad, but it is just the reality. So
Yeah.
and we've had successful companies who get money from other places, and that's going to continue. And you just have to realize that's part of the plan and be prepared.
Right. Barbara, I thought that was fascinating. It's really surprising that infectious diseases are not an area where, there's innovation or early stage discovery happening. So before we wrap
like I said, I think it's happening, but it's happening in existing companies. It's tucked away in current companies, not so much new companies who are just focused on COVID so far. And, I think part of it is because there's so much money coming from the government. And a new company that is starting something brand new, I think there's a risk that you're going to be too late by the time you actually move it far enough along. So there are some dynamics going on that explains that, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, and to everyone for being here.